Patty to introduce.
Recording in progress.
We have some new faces. Can we have them, people that are new, introduce themselves?
He's shaking his head. Tell you what, we'll do it afterwards. I think we're going to try and get right into the presentation, and afterwards we'll have a little bit more social time. So Patty Maloney is going to introduce our speaker.
Well, I'm really excited that Bryan Watts is able to join us tonight. And he has given me a little blurb on his introduction, but we also have a few extra things here. Dr. Bryan Watts is the Mitchell A. Byrd Professor of Conservation Biology and the Director of the Center for Conservation Biology at William & Mary. He's the author of more than 600 publications on avian ecology and conservation. Dr. Watts has studied birds since early childhood in West Virginia, where he was mentored by members of the local bird club. So you guys do good things, even here. He received an undergraduate degree from Virginia Tech, a master's from William & Mary, and a doctorate from the University of Georgia. Now, when I looked on the website, hopefully this is true. Over the last several years, he has designed and conducted and directed over 250 research projects involving avian species or communities with the mid-Atlantic region of North America. These projects have included virtually every avian community within the coastal plain. Projects have been conducted during all seasons of the year, but have focused on breeding and migration. Is that still true?
Yeah, well.
And then, late breaking news, I got this from the VSO folks. In 2013, VSO awarded Mitchell A. Byrd Award to Bryan Watts for exceptional record of contribution to scientific knowledge of Virginia birds. So welcome, Dr. Watts.
Thank you so much. Well, it's a thrill to be here, and like you said, I'm one of the lucky ones to grow up in a bird club since I was in grade school. I had great people. It's so nice to meet. You think so? So they can see?
Well, and so they can get the microphone.
Okay. Yeah, great people. People like Norris Gluck, George Hurley, Ken Anderson, Joe Ashworth, just people that when I was really little, always would take me out. And so that really got me into birding. And so I really think the bird clubs are really a critical part of the community, and always feel at home in bird clubs. So I am the director of the Center for Conservation Biology at William & Mary. We just work with birds. We work with birds of conservation concern throughout the Western Hemisphere. We've worked from Argentina up to the high Arctic. I would say we've worked with a lot of different species, but there's about 100 species or so that the center has long-term commitments to, like multi-decade commitments to, and bald eagles are one of those. And so Patty asked me today to talk about bald eagles. Happy to do that. So let's do that. Let's see if I can operate this thing. So I'm going to talk about just a couple of things. I'd like to say something about the Chesapeake Bay and why we're so lucky to be here, and then a little bit about bald eagles, and then the population, where we've been, and sort of where we are now with that. If you look along the Atlantic coast, the Chesapeake Bay is just one feature that really stands out. It's one of the largest estuaries in the world, and it's one of the unique estuaries in the world. It's unique because there is just so much shallow water, and so it's sort of like an underwater garden. And I'll say something about that in a minute, but you can see just how tremendous the shoreline is. It's a real dendritic estuary, and it's really huge, and it's one of the reasons why I'm here, why the center is here, because it's such an important place for birds, and that's why it's attractive to us. One of the features that you can see here, that's a multi-year accumulation of reflected chlorophyll, and you can see how the Chesapeake Bay lights up. It's just a tremendous place. I've written here, there's about 600,000 acres of water where the light actually penetrates to the bottom. And so it's like an underwater garden, has tremendous productivity. One of the things that we've seen in recent decades, of course, is that there's nearshore fertilization, sometimes over-fertilization of the bay. But all this comes together to mean that the bay is just tremendously productive. And that is why it is a convergence area for birds, both breeding birds, wintering birds, migratory birds, is because of this high productivity. One of the other features that you know about the bay is that it's a true estuary. We have freshwater inputs at the fall line. And so you have major inputs like the Susquehanna, Potomac, Rappahannock, James. Those account for about 80% of the fresh water that pours into the bay. You have saltwater inputs from the mouth. The segmentation of those different salinity zones varies throughout the bay. The James is unusual in that we have a really steep salinity gradient along the James because you have freshwater inputs that are only about 100 miles away from the oceanic inputs. And so it's a real steep gradient. If you look at the main stem of the bay with fresh water coming from the Susquehanna, those segments are tens of kilometers long, whereas on the James, it's much different than that. Really short segmentation. You'll notice the Coriolis effect here. Most of the salt water, which is heavy water, comes in, it goes up along the eastern shore, it goes up into the upper bay and it circulates back. And so it has this type of circulation. All right. One of the other features of the bay is, as you probably know, I'm sure, is that we are embedded within Bow Wash. Bow Wash is the second largest mega city in the world, second only to Tokyo, accounts for a couple $1 trillion in economic activity, or maybe 15% of GDP. So it is a tremendous economic engine. And as you also know, not only do we have Boston to Washington, we're increasingly having Washington to Richmond and Richmond to Virginia Beach, and it's only a matter of time until that is completely filled in, right? We feel that here in Williamsburg. When I fly over Williamsburg now, it is so different than it was when I started flying, 30 years ago. It's changed a lot in that time period. And I wanted to show you a little bit about that. This is a chronosequence of human population growth. This is at the block level. So this is our 10-year population surveys at the block level. 1949 was a different place. And so I'll go through time. And this is about where we are now. You can see those population centers are blowing out and they are consolidating, right? And we feel that in the traffic and everything as it goes forward over time. So people like the bay, right? I like the bay. We all like the bay. One of the reasons we like the bay is because of the productivity and the resources that come out of the bay, shellfish, finfish, et cetera, that we like, right? And one of the messages that I always try to bring to students, and particularly young students, is that we should leave some of that bounty that we all like for the other consumers. We're not the only consumer in the bay, so let's consider some of these other consumers. That's the fight that I'm playing right now with menhaden and osprey. We will be rapidly expanding our osprey work again, sort of back like we did in the 70s, to try to better understand what the issues are with menhaden. The center will be working in about 12 study areas throughout the bay this year. We'll probably be monitoring several hundred to 1,000 osprey pair, trying to better understand what's going on with them. Because I don't feel like we're leaving enough resources for them. Okay, what about bald eagles? To give you a brief introduction to them as a species before we talk about what's going on with the population. As you probably know, bald eagles fit within a particular genus. It's a group that we typically refer to as sea eagles. Some of these you're, I'm sure, very familiar with: stellar sea eagle, white-tailed sea eagle, which is the one across northern Europe, and the one that's most closely related to our form. I'm sure you've heard of African fish eagle. So those are all forms that the public typically knows about. There are other ones that are less well known: Pallas's eagle, Marshall Island eagle. Those are ones that are a little bit more obscure. There's about a dozen species. And one of the interesting things about them is that they're like brothers or cousins. They have very similar development traits, have very similar ecologies. They depend on large water bodies. They're all aquatic eagles. And the other interesting thing about it is that when we had the DDT crisis, virtually all of these species declined. And the great thing is that virtually all of those have now recovered, like our form has. There are a couple of exceptions to that that are having sort of unique problems for those species, but very similar characteristics in their development and so forth, very similar to ours. It turns out that our form is the only one in the New World. All the other species are Old World eagles. The bald eagle is the only one in the New World, and it's restricted to North America. And so there is no representative of this group in South America or Central America. And our particular form depends on large water bodies. It's an aquatic eagle. Here's a nest. So this is also characteristic of the group. They have a clutch size that varies between 1 and 3 eggs. Here's a typical nest. This happens to be in Northern Virginia. But you'll notice that the surface of this is fine material. The base of this nest is fairly large limbs. They're about that in diameter that they collect, dead limbs. And as they get closer to the breeding season, you'll see them collecting these fine materials. These are grasses. So when you're out and you see an eagle, typically here at our location in, say, December or January, going out in the fields and coming up with wads of grass, they're at the end of nest maintenance. So that's the last thing that you typically see them do before they begin to lay. And you can see that material here. The other feature of that nest that I hope you can see there is that it has a real distinct egg cup that holds the eggs. And that is all the soft material that they have shaped up into an egg cup. A lot of people ask how large are eagles' eggs. They're fairly large. Here's a typical baseball. They're about as long as a baseball is in diameter. So fairly large, you know, an egg like that. They have an unusual surface to them. You know, a lot of bird eggs have a glossy surface. They don't. It's a real dull sort of matte finish that they have. And now you can see the value of, so this is an incubating bird. This is on the James. This is sort of on the upper James near Hopewell. You can see the benefit of that egg cup. This bird, when they come in to start incubating, you'll see them crouch down and they'll rock back and forth. They're forming that soft material around the body, so it forms a seal. So they're able to seal off that egg cup, and with their incubation, that superheats that dead air space in there, and that keeps the eggs warm. The males and females are a little bit different in size, and so they reshape that. So that material, you know, it just fits the function that it has there. Incubation is about 36 days in this species. Here you can see an individual hatching. When they hatch, they're completely naked, and they are completely dependent on typically the female for body warmth. So they're an altricial species that requires body warmth until they get up to a certain point in development. Here now you can see that egg cup there. You can see that raised up, that soft material. This bird is just shortly after hatching, and this particular coat of down we refer to as natal down. It doesn't have a lot of insulating qualities. It's a real wispy down. From the air when we fly, they really stand out. They hold this down until they're 10 days old. So after 10 days, they replace it and they look different. We call these blondies from the air. And the blondies we know are typically, you know, 1 day to 10 days. After that, they change their appearance. And here you can see some chicks that are about 2 weeks old, and that natal down is now confined. It's being pushed out by a different coat of down. And this particular coat of down does have insulating qualities. It's very insulating, and it's not unusual to go up in the nest on a warmer day, and these birds are panting. It's very much like having a fur coat on, these birds. That natal down, you can see the last place that you see it as they develop out is on the crown. It's being pushed out and it will break off from this coat of down. These birds still require warmth. So with eagles, they can't maintain their own temperature until they're over 15 days old. So they require the adults to provide that warmth until they can regulate their own temperature. So that's a real developmental milestone when they reach that point. I'm going to show you some photos here that show different stages of development. One of the things that you'll notice as we go through is that see how these birds are sitting back on their joint. They're not standing up on their feet. They're back like this. We'll see that change over time. When the chicks are this age, they're pretty much just eating and sleeping, eating and sleeping. That's all they do. They're not really very alert. This is a nest up on the Rappahannock River. This chick here is about 4 weeks old, and we can tell this is another different characteristic. When they start to get the contour feathers that emerge, you can see that from the air. These chicks are about 4 weeks old when they're transitioning over to a full coat. And they're oftentimes very itchy and squirmy at this point because they're losing that down. And you can see the down on the crown there. It's at the end of the tips of those. It'll break off and it'll completely cover the nest. Then another feature that you can see about this particular nest is that there is a stick rim around it. That rim serves to sort of focus the chicks into the nest so they don't sort of walk off the edge. It's like a fence. Here's a brood over at Camp Perry. And these chicks here are about 6 weeks old. You can see they're quite a bit larger now, still back on their joints. And this is a chick over at Chip Oaks. This is a Chip Oaks State Park. And these chicks are 8 weeks old. And now you can see they're vertical. So once they get to this developmental stage, they're much more vertical. They stand up and perch most of the time instead of laying down all the time. And they are at maximum weight at this point. Chicks take 12 weeks to develop, but they are actually at their terminal weight at about 8 weeks. The rest of that 4 weeks, fully a third of their development time, is actually spent in neural development and coordination before they learn to fly. Okay, so they've reached terminal mass, but they still are uncoordinated. And it takes another 4 weeks for them to get that coordination. All right. These are large birds. So in the hand, they're quite large. Our birds here, our females are 10 to 12 pounds. The males typically 8 to 10 pounds or so. So they're fairly large. I'm going to show you some transitions in molt. Notice that this is a nestling here. And look at the brown iris that it has, and it has brown plumage. These are like when you see them out on the James, you can recognize first-year birds. They're what we refer to as chocolate birds because the plumage is all the same age and it's all the same color. It's a dark color. Once these birds get older, they start to have multiple generations of feathers. And so they're not uniform looking. When you go out on the James in June, July, you can see a lot of these birds and they are uniformly colored. They haven't gone through a molt yet. This is a second-year bird. So after you get past the winter, their feathers start to fade and they begin to initiate partial molt. And so the second-year birds are typically the most ratty ones. You see juvenile eagles out on the James. They really are poor looking. They have a lot of different types of feathers. They're real sort of mottled looking. Those are second-year eagles. This is a third-year eagle. And one of the things that you can notice is, and one of the things that gets me about having these birds in the hand is that there is a sequence of plumages that they go through. And it's not just the plumage that change, their soft tissue changes and so forth. And it's a completely different color scheme as you go through these developmental stages. And the wild thing is when you look at them is that they're different, but they all work. You know, like the motif of this is a third year bird. You can see that it's starting to form a hood here. It's a muted hood, but the iris matches that color and the bill color matches that. This is what we refer to as a white-bellied third year, and these represent only about 15 to 20% of the third years. Most of them have a dark belly, but this is a plumage variant, and it represents a relatively small portion of the birds that we see. Here's a fourth year bird, and you can see that with each of these, the hood is becoming more developed. This still has brown in it. You can see that the bill still has some dark in it also. And if we could see the tail, you would see that the tail still has brown in it. But they have attained the contour color that they're going to maintain throughout the rest of their life, the body feathers. And this is a full adult bird. And you can see that the plumage is quite different here. These have almost a powdery white hood, and the iris has turned to a very clear yellow. The soft tissue around the eyes now turned to yellow, and it has a clear bill. These birds are striking in the colors that they have. And, you know, one of the things you can see is that sometimes you'll see birds that don't quite have this striking color match, and their condition is not as good. You know, the ones that are really clean like that, you know that they're really healthy and in their prime. All right. Here you can see that color. It's really, it's just such a clean, powdery feel to that plumage. And I wanted to say something. So as you know, this bird has delayed breeding. They don't breed typically for the first time until they're 5 or older years old. And there's a steep learning curve as these birds develop. That's why they have delayed breeding, but that continues. And this is some of our survey data. And so that's territory age. The one at 1 there would be sort of 5, 6 years old. And productivity continues to increase with experience. We had data out to 15 years old, and it continues to go up. So experience matters when you're raising young. The older, more experienced ones are more effective parents. This is 3-chick broods. 3 chicks is their maximum brood, and the proportion that they raise of 3-chick broods goes up with experience. It is hard to raise 3 chicks. There's a lot of mouths to feed. They have to be able to provide for those. And so it's a feat to pull off a 3-chick brood, and it's the older ones that are typically doing that. One of the other things I wanted to mention is that the males and females differ. It's what we refer to as reverse sexual size dimorphism, where the female is larger. The female eagles are about 30% larger. And one of the ways that we can tell the sexes in the hand, as you know, the plumages are the same. They're not like cardinals that have different plumages, is the foot size. This bird here on our right is a male, and the one over there on the left is the female. The females are the ones with the large feet. The males have tiny wispy feet. It's not just the size like this, it's also that their toes are thinner and more finely boned. And so when you have them in the hand, it's the easiest way for us to tell the males from females. And if you remember the plumages, that male is actually a 3rd-year male. That female is a 4th-year female. And if you have the pair together, you can tell them, right? Look at the bird in the back with that real thick neck. That bird is considerably larger. Their breasts are much broader than the males. The males have a real sleek look to them. And, you know, after decades, I can tell the males when they're flying. The proportions to the body are different. The trunk is thinner, and their wings are actually thinner on the males. So with experience, you can tell the sexes apart. We're complicated here in the Bay in that we have an influx of northern birds, we have an influx of southern birds, and then we have our birds. And so you can get really tiny males from Florida up here that are about the size of a red-tailed hawk, compared to ours. And so there's a lot of variation that you can see in the Bay. But for our breeders, they're fairly easy to tell, particularly if they're side by side. One of the consequences of having a large body size is that you need a large platform to raise a brood. Here you can see that there are 5 individuals, 2 adults and 3 nearly full-grown chicks. That's a lot of birds to have on a particular nest. So these nests are large. They're about the size of Volkswagen type size. I can lay down on the nest and not hang off the edges on many of these nests. So they are large. And one of the consequences of that is that they need a large tree to support that nest. It's a lot of weight. And so that was a real restriction for us back in the 60s, 70s, having trees large enough. Most of the nest trees that we had during that time period were survivors from the Civil War period. As you know, during the Civil War, Virginia was denuded. Everything was cleared for the war. But we had survivor trees, and those persisted into the 60s, and most of the eagle nests that we had were in those survivor trees. Now, today, with secondary succession, we're getting a lot more trees that are of enough stature to support nests. So the nest trees are less limiting today than they were in earlier decades. This is a nest, me coming out of a nest up on the Rappahannock. So you can see the size of these. They're substantial nests that they use. A little bit about diet. About 94% of the prey that comes into the nest to rear broods is fish. So about 94%. These are fish eagles, I had a graduate student in the early 2000s. We outfitted a lot of nests with cameras to look at diet and provisioning and things like that. And that's where that information comes from. This is a nest up on the Parapatank. If you know the tributaries of the York River, this is one of the ones, and that's where this nest was. These are some turtle shells that I collected from various nests down here on the James. But these are aquatic turtles, and so they do take a lot of turtles. The one that they take the most is the stink pot. I don't know if you know that species. It's about like that. It's a water turtle. One of the reasons they take them is it's one of the turtle species that can't completely close its shell, and so they're vulnerable to eagles. But these are caught in the water. And when we look at the mammals, these are some skulls from the James. They will use a number of different mammals, possums, skunks, rabbits, but by far the most common mammal that you see in the nest is this one, muskrat. And so eagles truly are an aquatic species, and most of the prey that they take are associated with the water. They also take waterfowl, at this time of the year, and a number of gulls this time of year that roost on the water. So I'd like to shift now over, and by the way, this is an informal talk. If you have any questions, I'd rather talk about the things that you're interested in rather than what I'm going to ramble on about. So feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to answer. I'm sure you're familiar with the DDT era and so many raptors and other species that decline globally. So that was a real crunch time for our population here in the Chesapeake Bay. Population went down to a real low. We reached a low of about 60 to 80 pairs throughout the entire bay. Virginia population went down to 20 to 30 pairs. So a very tough time. And interestingly, as we became concerned about eagle populations nationally, the National Audubon identified a number of focal areas where monitoring was suggested. The Chesapeake Bay was one of those focal areas. And Jack Abbott from Northern Virginia, he was from Fort Belvoir at the time, started the Eagle survey in the Chesapeake Bay. Initially, it was a ground survey for a handful of years, and he was one of the first to do aerial survey work. He happened to be with Fort Belvoir and have access to military helicopters, and so he started some of the first aerial stuff. It's now the common way that we monitor eagle populations across the country, but it started here. The aerial work started here, and it was a much more effective way because you can go into some of your remote areas that birders don't have access to. So Jack did some of the first surveys, and then the next year, Fred Scott joined him. So Jack was doing the upper bay, Fred was doing the lower bay, and they teamed up from 63 till about 76. Running the survey. Some of you, I don't know if anyone knows Fred. Fred died quite a while ago, but Fred was sort of considered the dean of the Virginia bird watchers. He managed the Raven and so forth for like 30 years. A real powerhouse. And anyway, these two guys started the Eagle survey in the Bay. And then Mitchell Bird. This is Mitchell. Mitchell took over the survey in Virginia in 1977. And then I joined Mitchell in 91. And that's Captain Fuzzo Shermer there on the left. Fuzzo was the best pilot we ever had. Mitchell flew with me up until he was 91. So Mitchell is 95 and a half now. Still getting out some. Fuzzo flew, he also retired. Fuzzo's now 83. So he flew with me until about 2 years ago. Yeah, so we had great times, you know, for 30 plus years flying the Bay with eagles, not just eagles, a lot of other species, colonial water birds and so forth. So this is an old image now, but I wanted to show you some of the recovery of productivity. And so you can see going back to the beginning of the survey, we were in a really deep deficit. The population was declining because the pairs were not producing enough young to offset adult mortality. And so the population was plummeting. It wasn't until you get to about 1980 that productivity recovered to the point that it was above maintenance. And then the population really began to grow. And we do have a pre-DDT productivity estimate, and that was from Bryan Terrell in 1936. And you can see that once we get here to about the mid-1980s, we are pretty comparable to the 1930s, the pre-DDT period. And so we have maintained above maintenance since that time. So we climbed out of the DDT period. And this is also an old image, but the recovery goal that was set by the Fish and Wildlife Service for the Chesapeake Bay was 300 pairs, 150 in Maryland, 150 in Virginia. We blew right through that in the early 1990s, you can see. And so there was justification for delisting. We downlisted bald eagles in 1999, and we delisted them in 2007. Okay, so they have been removed. The population was growing at a tremendous rate, about 8 to 12% per year during that sort of boom time. I want to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to show you a series of the population growth beginning in 1970, which was fairly close to the low. Yeah, so we continued to monitor the entire lower part of the bay. Mitchell and I did until 2016. That's about 150 hours of flying in spring. You know, we fly an early survey to map new nests and to check the status of old pairs. And then we come back in late April, early May and count the chicks in the nest. So it's a fairly significant effort. When Mitchell was first flying, it was a sort of dead, you know, there weren't that many pairs. By the time that Fuzzo and I get to 2021 on the James, we were flying 250 to 300 nests a day. So it was a whole different scene, and it was hardcore, data collecting, because we were hitting nests like this. I mean, just one right after the other all day. So it changed. So the population has recovered. It's more than recovered. It's been fantastic. Really more than anybody could have hoped for in terms of the recovery. And so in a very short period of time, so DDT was a population perturbation that happened, but the population recovered in a pretty short period of time from that DDT low. And, not just our species, but other fish eagles around the world have pretty much recovered. And not just those, many other raptors, many water birds that suffered due to DDT have also recovered. It's taken a while and some effort, but many of these populations have recovered. So I want to say something now about sort of where are we, what have we been working on more recently, and what do we continue to be concerned about? This is on the Upper Potomac, where we used to fly every year. All of that money that is in DC has been spilling out across the landscape for decades now. It's been like a tidal wave coming down the Potomac. And these were industrial scale developments where, they were developing hundreds of acres at a time. And so we were very concerned at this time, about the loss of habitat to ongoing residential and urban development, and came out against a lot of the things. I mean, the center opposed the delisting that was proposed in '99. So that was proposed under the Clinton administration. The center opposed it, and were one of the reasons I think that it was delayed. And it was strictly because of habitat loss that was going on in the bay. And the view was that, land was a zero-sum game. You either give it to eagles or you give it to people, and they didn't mix at the time. We had no evidence that they mixed at the time, okay? Until later. This is also in the Upper Potomac, and you can see that nest next to a pool there. It turns out that over time, this did not happen in the 70s and 80s timeframe, but once we get to sort of the late 1990s, early 2000s, we began to see incidents of cohabitation here, so that maybe habitat is not a zero-sum game. Maybe it is that people and eagles can live together. And now, today, these residential pairs, that part of the population is really the fastest growing part of the bay population now. So they've run out of space in all these other places. Now they're moving into the neighborhoods. Yeah.
How close is that to a body of water or a river?
Yeah, it's no distance to the river. So this house is close to the shoreline, and so the nest is right there where you would expect it to be if the houses weren't there. And I'm sure you know that, we have nests. There are 3 nests in Governor's Land. There are 2 nests in Kings Mill. First Colony has a nest. There are a lot of nests in residential areas now of Williamsburg. One of the things that we've continued to be concerned about, the thing with contaminants is, like DDT, there's just this endless parade of contaminants. And so we continue to try to be vigilant about new emerging contaminants. This was a project we did a couple of years ago for the Park Service. We sampled blood. We took blood samples from a number of the eagles on Park Service lands because they were concerned about contaminants for their pairs. There are always a number of emerging contaminants in the bay. The one that is of most concerning right now are pharmaceuticals, right? So our sewage treatment plants have no capacity to filter out pharmaceuticals. So these pharmaceuticals that we take go through us, and eventually they're making their way into the bay, right? The problem is that these pharmaceuticals, oftentimes, if they're hormones or something like that, have very small effective concentrations, right? It takes a little tiny bit of it goes a long way. And so with the increase in the human population, the pharmaceuticals are making their way into the water. And so that's something that we need to be concerned about long term. It's just one of a number of ones. I wanted to say something about the James now. So this is a sequence here that you can see that shows just the James breeding pairs. And this shows what the growth has been like. The James was the only major tributary of the bay that actually went to zero. There were 5 years in the 1970s where the population went to zero. Many people think it's a sort of synergistic effect of a number of contaminants that were being put into the James during the 1960s that led to this. But you can see leading up to the point where there were no known breeding pairs on the James, there was an 11-year period there where the entire river only produced 3 chicks. So that's why it just kept going down and down. It wasn't until 1980, 1979, where we had a pair recolonize. So when Mitchell started surveying the James in 1977, when he took over, there were no breeding pairs on the James. The James was completely dead. In 1979, there was a pair that formed on Upper Chip Oaks Creek. Upper Chip Oaks Creek is just up the river from Williamsburg. And from that pair, the population recovered and then really began to recover. You can see the explosive growth. So when I stopped the last survey in 2021, we were over 350 pairs. That's a pretty short period of time to grow to that extent.
Right.
Yeah.
How far up the James does this depict?
Yeah, so we only surveyed throughout the bay only to the fall line. So that's at Richmond. So the estuary is incredibly productive. Once you go beyond the fall line on any of these tributaries, below the fall line, you know, right now we're at 2 or 3 pairs per kilometer of shoreline. Once you go above, you're at about 1 pair per 10 miles. So it's just a difference in the productivity that's supporting those pairs. Yeah.
Is it the species of fish that contributes once you get above fish, species of fish that different than the species of fish? The fish shift along the salinity gradient as you go toward the fall line. And then once you go beyond the fall line, which is non-tidal at that point, yes, there's a different fish community, but there is overlap between them. But the real issue is prey density, right? That's why they're able to pack in so tightly. And I believe, maybe we'll never be able to know, but you might know that American shad, which is a big anadromous fish that comes up the tributaries, and they spawned all the way up into the mountains. When we dammed a lot of the rivers, we stopped those spawning events. But if you go back prior to those dams, if you go back in the literature, the historians there would talk about how you would get these huge shad die-offs, right? They would go up and spawn, and then the rivers would be, you know, just stench from all of these dead shad. That would have supported a ton of eagles at that time. So I think that these dams really changed the eagle population above the fall line. I think historically, there probably were a lot of eagles above the fall line. One of the things that shifted, and one of the reasons we continued to survey the James, this shows the productivity. You can see what happens here. The productivity peaks around 2000 or so, and it falls off of that peak. In fact, we have traced all the way back, if you run across, to 1980 levels of productivity. So the productivity has been dropping for the last 20 plus years on the James. Why is that? And should we be concerned about it? That's one of the things we've been studying, what I refer to as the last chapter of recovery. So this shows 3 different time periods, and it shows overall productivity, and you can see how that's declined. A number of things have changed over that time. This is a 3-chick brood on the Colonial Parkway, just behind the Hawk area. This nest used to be right across the road from where the Hawk count is there. And there are 2 components to this. One is that the failure rate has increased, pairs that are producing no chicks.
And then for the ones that are successful, the average brood size has declined. Those two things together determine what the productivity is. And so what's going on? For all the years up until the late 1990s, when we would fly and check these nests, this is the situation that you would see, what I refer to as symmetrical broods. They're the same size from the air. They look the same. And I can remember distinctly in the late 1990s, up on the Pamunkey River, we were flying and saw the first one that I can remember of an asymmetrical brood. This is a brood that's up at Tappahannock. We were up there to band. That chick on the right there is half the weight of that one on the left there. So they're not growing at the same rate. And why is that? It's because there's not enough food coming in. So if there's plenty of food, which there used to be, then the chicks will grow at the same rate. They don't form a dominance hierarchy, and they're both happy, right? If there's not enough food coming in, what happens is there's a dominance hierarchy that forms within the brood, whether it's a 2 or 3 chick brood, and it's the alpha chick, the dominant one, that gets fed first. It's dominant. It pushes the other one away. The parent will continue to feed it until it's full, then it goes away and it'll feed the other one if there's anything left. If there's not anything left, chick number 2 gets nothing. Okay. That's the behavioral mechanism that matches the brood size to the available food coming in. If they didn't do that, if they fed them evenly, they have a chance of both of them dying, right? So it's a hedging your bet type strategy that most raptors have. Okay. So this is a simulation that I did that shows what is happening in our population. So I stopped this at 100 breeding pairs. These are the breeding pairs in black. What happens when you reach capacity and there's no more space and you continue to produce chicks is that you have all of these birds that are of breeding age, but they have no place to breed. We've run out of space. And Moffat's equilibrium is where the age structure becomes stable. For eagles, when that happens, the juveniles and the birds of breeding age, which are the red ones here, actually can be like 8 times the number of the breeding adults. So that's why when people ask how many eagles are in the bay, okay, we have 3,000 pair in the bay now. That's 6,000 breeding adults, but that's not how many eagles we have, right? It's actually 40,000 eagles we have in the bay just with our population because those breeders are carrying all these other subadults. What has changed since 2000 is that it's not just young birds that are not breeders. It's these birds here that would like to breed, but they don't have any space to breed. And so what happens when you have all of these floaters that we refer to them, breeding age birds that don't have space to breed, is that they begin to put downward pressure on the breeders. So you have haves and have-nots. The have-nots start to fight with the haves over space. Okay, that's what will eventually bring the population into balance with the available space. Here's an example of that. So there's a female that's incubating, and there's a 4th year bird, it looks like, coming in. That bird is attacking the incubating female there. I had a graduate student a few years ago, Courtney Turin, and she did a bunch of observations to look at intrusion rates. How many intrusions are these pairs suffering, on a daily basis, significant at that time. Okay. So the response to that is this. Here, this one's Chickahominy, above Walker's Dam. Here you can see an adult with 2 chicks. Those chicks are about 3 weeks old. That's the female that stays there. The male is the provider. So they have a division of labor. The female stays and guards the chicks. She also warms the chicks. If food comes in, she feeds it to the chicks. It's the male's responsibility to be the provider. He's the hunter. A lot of people think that he has a lighter body weight because he's doing more of the flying. So he is providing, and that is him there in what we refer to as guarding position. So the response to all of these attacks is that the male has to stay home and protect the female and the brood. If he doesn't, then they're subject to being disrupted and lose the chicks. So you can see now that he's torn, right? Am I going to spend all of my time hunting to provide for the brood that's there? Or am I going to stay home more time in order to protect what we have there? So it's this trade-off that's happening. And here's the answer to that. So there's data that I collected in the 3 time periods that we saw earlier. And what you can see is that the time that the male stays home and guards went from about 36, 37% to over 70% over this time. So what's happening is he's having to stay home and protect. He can't spend enough time to provide for a 3-chick brood anymore. He can't do both of these things. It's one or the other. And so that is what's driving the productivity down. And so over that short period of time, we've gone from an average brood size of 2 down to an average brood size of 1. The productivity has dropped off significantly. Yeah.
How long is it before the chicks can find their own food source?
Yeah. Yeah, there's another graph that I could show you, which is that the guarding is happening in the first 4 weeks. So after the chicks reach 4 weeks old, they're not as vulnerable to attack anymore. So they're larger. There are 2 different things, developmental thresholds with the chicks. One is when can they tear food for themselves so that the female doesn't have to feed them all the time. That happens at about 4 weeks or so. When are they independent? That's not for months. Okay, so once those birds can fly, they're still being provided for by the adults for another 30 to 60 days before they disperse on their own and can take care of themselves.
And are they still being defended during that?
No,
period?
no, after they're about 4 weeks old, that's the critical period from hatching up to 4 weeks. After that, the guarding drops off. And if you look at guarding during incubation, it's relatively low. It's when those chicks hatch that these intruders are putting most of the pressure on. When Catherine, my earlier graduate student, was here and we had a bunch of cameras in nests, we had one down on the lower James and the chicks were taken and eaten by a male in that nest because the female just could not fend off on her own. Okay. So just to summarize, the bald eagles have exceeded the recovery goals. They have done fantastic. You know, you can go just about anywhere you want here in the Bay region and see eagles most days overhead if you're aware of them flying over. We need to remain vigilant about some things, you know, so we don't get a reversal in the population. And the final chapter of recovery is playing its way out. In fact, I walk through Eastern State every day from my office, usually around 11 or so. And for years, I couldn't walk through Eastern State without having a couple of eagles overhead. I'm not seeing that now. I would say for the past year and a half or so, I'm not. Why? Because the pairs have now dropped productivity off, okay? And so that as adults are being lost to normal mortality, that is now working off the backlog of floaters. And so those things are going to work through the system and it will be in more of a normal balance. And that is sort of the last chapter of recovery. You know, prior to this work, we didn't know what to expect. You know, how are eagles going to have a soft landing, you know, when they're growing exponentially? It's this behavioral feedback, you know, that's going to bring them into balance. And it's one of the reasons that Mitchell and I continued to survey long after the population had recovered, because we were interested in some of these mechanisms. All right.
What percentage of the subadults stick around and become these floaters, and what percentage kind of get pushed off and find their own territory?
Yeah, we don't know the answer to that. So yes, that's a good point. So a portion of our floaters stay here and put pressure on the breeders. But we know that a portion of those decide to disperse out and colonize other areas. So the colonization that we have been seeing in Western Virginia, Highland County, places like that, that did not have a population for years and years, those are coming. Those are overflow from the Chesapeake. And in fact, the population recovery that we're seeing in West Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, that is all because the Chesapeake is so productive that those floaters are flowing out across the mid-Atlantic landscape. And so those populations are growing pretty rapidly now. That's being fueled by these floaters moving out.
And they have what they need in Highland County and places like that.
They appear to be doing okay. You know, they're going to max out too. So the densities are much lower than what we have here. You know, a fraction, but they seem to be doing okay. They seem to be productive. Yeah.
When you talked to us a couple of years ago about osprey, you were saying that one of the big questions is with the increase of both populations at that point, how was that going to balance out? Now we're seeing osprey dropping. Do you think there's some correlation there, or is it all related to New Haven fishing? Repeat the question for the Zoom audience.
Yeah. So the question is, are these populations interacting? And is one population influencing the other? That is an important question and one that we would like to know more about. It goes both ways, and I'll explain. So we are getting more and more indication that eagles are taking osprey chicks, even fairly large osprey chicks. You know, we have a population over on the Eastern Shore. So eagles now are like this huge metabolic engine, right? And that engine is running and it needs fuel. And that, you know, the fuel that they're taking is across the board. So, you know, we have a pelican colony over on Wreck Island, and, you know, that's like a refrigerator, right? I mean, all the eagles in the area know exactly where that colony is. You know, it's got a couple thousand chicks there on the ground. So they're probably, you know, they're going there every day, right? So it is spreading out in ways that we could not have, that we didn't anticipate, I think. Nothing to do about it. You know, in terms of the other way, on the Upper James, you know, we did shoreline boat surveys of eagles, you know, from about Winoke up near Richmond for 30 years. I mean, we mapped eagles along the shoreline, and there are a lot of points. Eagles like to nest on the points. I like to hunt from the points. They'll perch on the points so they can have good visibility. A lot of those points now have osprey nests on them, and those eagles don't use them anymore because the osprey just wear them out. I mean, you know, just constant harassment and everything, so they don't use them anymore. So I think that some of the foraging areas have been lost to eagles due to the recolonization of these upper areas by osprey. But eagles are absolutely reducing productivity of osprey by taking chicks. I wish we had more of a handle on that. You know, Michael and I were working the North River in 2021, and there was a couple there that had a platform, and there's an eagle nest across the creek. And we got there early in the morning, and the lady was out there, and the eagles had just come in. The ospreys had just hatched. They took the chicks, but the eagles also killed the adult male osprey of that pair. So this interaction is going on. We don't really have a good handle on it, but we know it's happening.
Battle for nests too.
Yeah, they'll sometimes use each other's nests. They've always done that. You know, the eagles don't take a lot of osprey nests, but the ospreys will use eagle nests occasionally, and it's typically abandoned nests. You know, if the eagle wants it, it'll take it. And they have an earlier breeding, you know, season, so they have dibs on them.
When they're at the hawk watch, we see battles time between the osprey and the eagles for the fish. The
Yeah.
osprey will be fishing the young eagle will come in and harass it and then get that, then the adult eagle will come in. It just keeps going up the chain. And the osprey is going away without its food.
Yeah.
And we've seen osprey change the way that they're coming out of the water, flying as low as they can so that they can make it across the James and not be attacked from above, because the eagles are just circling above watching for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So the osprey have become more stealthy and trying to sneak
Yeah.
around and stuff. Yeah,
And
we see the
quieter,
same.
too, or trying.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah. And you're right that we've done a lot of eagle foraging observations on the Upper James, and it is the juveniles that are poorer hunters. And as you know, eagles steal from each other. And one of the main strategies of juveniles is to continue to harass adults to get fish from them. So they're the pirates, you know, they also use landfills a lot more. So we did, you know, we put out a paper a few years ago, Courtney and I did, about landfill use, and it's the juveniles that are primarily using the, you know, the landfills. The adults aren't using them as much. So, yeah.
A question going way back to the nests and the soft grasses. Do they clean, because they reuse the nest for so many years, do they clean any of that out? Or do they just add grass on top every year, just like they're adding sticks everywhere?
Most of them add to the top, and they don't clean anything. And in fact, if you dig down in there, you'll find prey remains all the way down in. And sometimes you'll find old eggs deep down under there. And, you know, the pairs differ one to the other. Sometimes, you know, you have some pairs that are squared away. Every year you fly, you know that the nest is just going to be so-so. They're going to have it together, and they're going to have, you know, they're going to be incubating at the right time. Then you got other nests that are, you know, pig pens. They, you know, and it's always the same. You know, that pair just doesn't have it together, and the nest is going to be all whacked out and, you know, stuff like that. So it varies pair to pair for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, lead poisoning, that's a big problem with all eagles in here. But, what, can you spot any of that in, you know, birds that you're seeing around, birds you're seeing perched or resting, and then is it, can you spot lead poisoning in an eagle that's still viable?
Well, sometimes. So that has become an epidemic, as I'm sure everybody knows. So this is lead ammunition, mostly deer hunting. You know, we used to think that that slug held together. Now we know it doesn't. So there have been a number of X-ray studies, you know, have shown that, and this is relevant to human consumption also, you know, is that when you shoot a lead bullet, it explodes and goes throughout the entire carcass. So you have little fragments everywhere, you know, so people that eat venison, they're also eating these little lead fragments. They're throughout the entire carcass. And so, you know, we have tried to encourage hunters to bury, not to leave carcasses available. You know, it used to be, we didn't think it was that big of a deal because, you know, we didn't know that the lead spread out. But that has become a huge epidemic. It's probably one of the major causes of adult mortality now is lead poisoning. And just a lot of eagles coming into rehab centers now with really high lead levels. We don't see it in the chicks, so we tested for lead in the blood. A larger issue for the chicks is really mercury, and they're getting that through the fish. Yeah.
What's the prospect of banning lead ammunition?
Well, that's been a 50-year effort. Yeah, in some states we have been successful at banning the shotgun shot to go to steel rather than lead. There are certainly substitutes for lead, but it requires buy-in, you know, from the hunter community. And in some states there has been good buy-in and it's been effective, but I think we're a good ways from sort of universal reduction in lead use. Yeah.
Are you seeing notable earlier nesting, hatching, and fledging locally related to climate change?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. It used to be an early, so you all were mentioning earlier, the pair over on Jamestown Island as being, the early pair typically that we have. So, we always started the survey here on the James and worked north. There's about a 5-day difference in nesting phenology, the James compared to the Potomac. As you go farther north, it continues to get later. And that particular nest on the James here on Jamestown Island was for years and years the early one. We used to call them the Christmas eagles because they typically laid around Christmas. It was a good bit earlier than everywhere else. Now we have pairs that are laying in late November. Yeah, so we always time the survey to try to maximize the proportion of birds that were on eggs so that we could document the breeding. And we would always fly, during the first 2 weeks of March. But we have begun to move that earlier now when we fly. I'm not flying as much now. We're flying military properties. Like this year, we'll be flying the Naval Weapons Station, Oceana, some of those properties. Last year, we did a bunch of work up on the Susquehanna. We're continuing to do work in Maryland. But we're not doing the large surveys that we were doing. But yeah, it continues to get earlier. And, I have thought that the timing of breeding, so the American shad spawns from the St. Johns River in Florida all the way up to Nova Scotia. And the timing of that spawn shifts as you go up in latitude. And we have thought that the timing of eagle breeding was matched to when those fish come up the rivers. And that is shifting later and later now.
Ann has any questions in the chat? Other questions in here?
I've gone over, I think.
No, you're doing great. We're loving it. Ann, are there any questions in the chat? We can't.
You can't see them?
No, well, I guess if we can we stop sharing your screen? Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Bryan, for a very fascinating and informative presentation. Okay, I see that.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, anybody else? Well, that was fabulous. We could probably keep you here all night, but I know you probably don't want to be here all night. Anybody? Yeah, for sure. Question is how many?
Yeah, we have had 9.
The question was how many?
Phenomenal density for that piece of property there. And Mulberry Island is about the same, 10 on Mulberry Island. I mean, that's just a phenomenal density for there. So when Jack Abbott started the survey, he always mentioned that Jamestown Island was the center of eagle activity. This was in the early 60s because it still had 3 pairs. Those were lost later, right? But now we have 9. Yeah, and we have a couple of roosts also, communal roosts on Jamestown Island. So yeah, just unbelievable. And it's these peninsulas. Hog Island, I think, has 7 or 8. Mulberry Island has 10. Curls Neck Swamp, which is a similar peninsula, now has 6 pairs. So they're just right on top of each other. And it was never thought that eagles could breed this close to each other, but they do here. Okay. Thank you.
Listen to that program every night and I'd learn something new every time. Let's see what happens. Yeah.
All right. Perfect.
Oops.
Oops.
Yep. Uh-oh.
We lost them.
You're done.
Okay. What I'm gonna do is unplug this.
Yeah, you might have got it back.
We're still here.
I'm gonna unplug this from and try plugging it back in.
What's the average lifespan?
In the wild, we have had them around 29, but in captivity, it's about 10 years more.
Can you guys see? All right, we're back. We're back. Okay, well, again, thank you so much. That was just fabulous. I think we all learn, every time we hear you, we learn more and more. And we all love the Eagles and we all love to keep an eye on them, so, and the Osprey. Let's see, we do have a couple of announcements of upcoming events. Scott Hemler. Thank you, Brian. Yep. I wish you would take some of that food with you.
No.
Okay.
Great to see you all.
Yeah, thanks so much. Scott, I'm gonna turn it over to you to let us know about the upcoming bird walk.
Hi, yes. We're gonna have our monthly bird walk on this Saturday at 8 o'clock at New Quarter Park. We're gonna meet at the usual spot there in the parking lot by the park office. And the weather looks it's all right. I've seen different forecasts, but the last one I saw looks like it's gonna be sunny but cold. So we'll have to bundle up. But we'll meet there at 8 o'clock and we'll take about 2 hours. We'll walk down to the dock to see if there's any ospreys here yet, because they are starting to come back, I hear. And of course, look for eagles too. So that'll always be fun to look for. So yeah, we'll be meeting this Saturday at 8 o'clock at New Quarter Park.
Great, thank you so much. Scott does a great job leading those. They're a lot of fun. So hopefully a bunch of us will be there. Next, George, you want to speak to our next field trip? George is our field trip guru. He knows how to put them together.
Okay, our next field trip is going to be Saturday, March 16th. We'll be going to Machicomico State Park, and we'll be meeting at the parking lot just inside the pay station at the park. I won't be doing carpools for that one. You're free to organize carpools on your own. Deborah Humphreys will be leading us at the park. Thank you, Deborah. And we look forward to having some better weather than we've had for the last 2 field trips. And then mark your calendars for Saturday, April 20. We will be going to Newport News Park for a field trip. More details to come.
Great, thank you, George. Yeah, I have to say that it's been a little chilly, the last ones, but we hung out. We did okay. Mary Ellen would like me to announce that the deadline for the newsletter will be the Monday, the 26th. She would love to get photos, articles, anything you want to send in, maybe some things from backyard bird count. I know a lot of people were doing out and about on the great backyard bird count. So if you have something to send it to Mary Ellen by Monday, the 26th. How do you want to say anything about our upcoming meetings or?
Sure.
Okay.
Hey, so our March meeting is going to be Dan Crystal, and he's going to be talking about Superfund and how it's impacting birds. And then April is going to be the students, the research grant students. We'll be talking about their various topics that they did. And May, we're going to hear from Nancy about India. So we've got some great things coming up this spring.
Okay, will those be here?
Yes, I'll be here.
Yes, at least through the spring, correct? We'll be doing hybrid meetings from here, 7 o'clock. We do get to have refreshments. We can stay as late as 9. It ends up being the best deal for us. I do want to remind folks that dues are due. There's been a little flurry of activity. I sent a general reminder out to some folks, and dues are coming in. You can renew online. You can join online. You can renew online. So if you don't, you'll hear from me probably. So feel free to renew at any time or join. I know that Cheryl would like to speak about an update on the Purple Martins who are getting ready to come back.
Well, we are all excited because our monitors are ready and the martins are on their way. The Martin Association, the Purple Martin Association has on their website a way of tracking the martins. And so when martins are sighted, it's shown on this map so you can see just where martins are. And as of tonight, they're in North Carolina. So they are on their way. They do slow down. They can fly 200 miles a day, but when they reach a point where there's no more bugs, they kind of hang out there and eat bugs until it warms up further north. So usually we see martins at our gourds early in April. That first week in April, we start seeing some scouts. So we're excited about that. Last year, we had an effective year. We fledged about 130 martin babies. So that was really good for us. We were really happy about that. We have 5 different sites and 3 of those sites were very productive. York River State Park had their martins for the first time and had 2 nesting pair there. So we were excited about that because it'd been a couple years waiting for them to begin to use that site. And when we cleaned out the gourds at Vim's, why 6 of the gourds had nests in them, nesting material. So what happens is that when fall migration begins, if there's birds flying overhead and they see the colony, they'll come down and they'll start bringing in nesting material and then they'll come back in the spring. So these are nests that weren't actually used all year, but when fall migration started, why they started moving into them. So I think we'll have an active colony going at Vim's. New Quarter Park has been slow.
We got high hopes for this year.
Yeah, we always have high hopes. And in order to address some concerns there, I've been working with the staff to try to have less mowing on the point where the colony is set up. And they have agreed at this point that they won't mow that area any lower than 4 inches. So I'm hoping that that'll be a beginning and we'll see whether that higher, because they were mowing all the way down the dirt, you know, and you can't have bugs when there's nothing there for plants. And the Chick has been one of our best sites. We have 23 gourds there and all 23 were used last year. So Shannon and I did an extension. We can use an extension kit and we expanded one of the poles so that we could add more gourds to it. So we'll be able to have 30 gourds up at the Chick. And I'm hoping that we'll fill all of those. Things are kind of up in the air there because they're doing a major change of how they're using their property. And they have torn out lots and lots and lots of trees and habitat. And they have moved lots of dirt, tonnage and tonnage and tonnage of dirt. So that whole area, excuse me, that was behind the colony poles is now dirt that's piled 6 feet high. So I don't know how that's going to affect. They've been very careful about the poles, not to damage the poles, but the habitat has really been impacted and they aren't done yet either. And so with the rain, that slowed down the project. And so hopefully they'll be done soon so that the martins will be coming in and not have all that heavy duty equipment there. So we're expecting a good year and our monitors are happy and in place. And we've got lots of them here tonight and on Zoom. So I really appreciate our monitors and we'll keep you posted on how we're doing.
Thank you.
Do you still need monitors? I mean, do you still need volunteers or? Actually, we're good.
We'll let you know. We might need subs.
Yeah, people keep traveling, they need
Yeah, right. Well, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, but it might not be a bad idea to have a couple of subs because we do try and monitor every week, so. Let's see, I think that's all I had. Oh, we have door prizes. Oh, yeah. How about some new folks want to just raise your hand, say your names? Tell you what, we haven't seen it. This is the first time we've met in person in 2024. So how about everybody goes around, say your name, where you're from? Want to start in the back?
I'm Conrad Schwab. I'm gonna move here. Very had the pleasure of being class with Dr. Bird, so.
Nice. Great, welcome. That's terrific.
I'm Victoria West, and we've lived here for 25 years, so this is kind of, we're newbies at this.
Oh, good. Well, 25 years, you know where all the birds are then.
This is true.
Okay, we'll follow you around.
I'm Tom West. I'm the third.
Okay. I kind of got that.
I'm Rick Brown. I'm from Williamsburg.
He's a closet birder. He likes to pretend he doesn't like them, but he does.
I like burgers.
Okay,
George Martin, Williamsburg resident for almost 6 years now.
so Shirley knows where all the birds are too. Mhm.
Good evening, I'm Mark Tipo. It's my first meeting here. My wife Anita and I have lived in Williamsburg at Powhatan Village for the last 3 years. So we've got everything set up and our grandkids are all set. So now I have time to pursue other interests.
Wonderful.
But I was telling Nancy, we have a forest right within 20 feet of our porch. So that kind of piqued my interest in.
Nice.
And we have an owl and a hawk and a bunch of birds, a ton of birds around. So
That's great.
looking forward to learning from all of you.
Wonderful.
I'm Jan Lockwood. It's when I sort of like to realize that I've been here now.
15. Cheryl Jacobson. My time goes so fast. I think I've been here about 10 to 12.
I'm Kathy Millar. We moved to Williamsburg in 1980 and joining the Bird Club was one of the best things I ever did.
Oh, yay.
I'm Bill Weldon, and my wife and I have been dues paying members for about 30-some years. But
Wow.
have only become active in just the last few months.
And Bill's hardy. He doesn't mind the cold field trips.
Yeah, Saturday was a lot of fun.
Good. Wait till it gets warm. You'll really love it.
Yeah.
I'm Roxanne Bruno, and let's see, I moved to Williamsburg 7 years ago, and I've lived in Virginia for over 25 years.
I'm Deborah Humphreys and I moved to Williamsburg a little over 4 years ago and joined the Bird Club immediately. So this is my first full year. Excited to keep doing the hot lunch again.
I'm Herb Spath, my wife Beverly Spath. We've been members for a number of years now. Enjoy it.
Moved here in 1998, I joined Bird Club immediately.
Nice.
We are not really active, but we appear every once in a while.
There you go.
We really enjoy it.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Ms.
I'm
Pat.
Patty Lynn. I came down to Northern Virginia, been here about 20 years.
I'm Nancy. I've been here, I don't know, 13, 14 years, but been birding for many, many. And I would like to announce that College Creek Hawk Watch, which in theory starts on March 1st, had we'll call it a soft opening today with a red-tailed hawk and a couple of vultures. So I guess we're up and running as much as the cold weather will allow. So, and that's on College Creek on the Parkway. And we love visitors. Hopefully one of us will be there every day, like in theory, March 1st through the end of May. So days that are conducive to migrating birds. We love to have visitors. Bring a chair, bring your lunch. bring a blanket, bring a thermos of coffee, and we love to have visitors. So drop in, sit with us for a while, spot some things. You don't have to know what you're looking at. Half the challenge is pointing to them. So we love to have visitors.
And what time?
Yeah, again, back in theory, 9 to 1 is roughly what we try to cover. It depend a little bit on the weather. Well, it definitely depend, the weather can make a difference. Sometimes we'll stay, if there's a big push, we might stay till 2:30. If it's cold and we're freezing, and it doesn't look like anything's flying, we might leave early. But yeah, roughly 9 to 1 every day through the month of May.
And where do you meet?
We meet at, if you're on the Colonial Parkway, about 5 miles up from Jamestown on College Creek. So there are 2 parking lots. One's on the riverside and a little bit further on is on the other side. If you know the waysides, there's one that says orientation map. That's the big sign at that pullout. And that's where we meet. We just pull into the parking lot. We set up our chairs and watch. We're looking south. We're looking at Hog Island, which is south. We're watching for purposeful northward flying raptors. So, and we'd love to have folks. Yeah. Anybody in the Zoom audience have anything you'd like to add or bring up or comment on? Anybody? I see we had a lot of participants tonight. That's wonderful. Well, with that, I think we're down to our door prizes. We have a puzzle with a block of suet. We have a Julie Zickfu's book about bluebirds with a block of suet. And we have a little field guide to the birds of Virginia with a little block of suet. Hot pepper suet, the best, the absolute best. So Patty's gonna pull some numbers here.
So the last 3 numbers, 285.
285, last 3 numbers. Oh, yay. Well, go get something to go with your suet. I think we also have some bookmark. Do we have bookmarks still? Those can go to anybody.
You can have whatever you want.
Those of you on Zoom, we have just our little quick door prizes going on. And then we do have a lot of good sweets over there. I wish we could send them virtually to you all. Next one.
Last one, 281.
28 what?
281.
281. 281.
281.
Oh, okay. Cheryl? This books might be good for grandchildren too, that little book.
Yeah. It's kind of cute.
Puzzle, and take your suet.
And the last one is 291.
291, last 3. Woohoo! Roxanne, you need suet. And the book will be good for, your grandson might like the book.
That's true.
There you go. Well, that is all I have. Anybody else here in the room have anything you want to report? Any good, great backyard bird count sightings or anything exciting? Cold. I heard from a lot of folks that entered sightings for the first time. So Jan, did you have something? Your barred owls? 2 of them. Jan has the good fortune of having barred owls in her yard, basically. Oh, and lots of crows. Yeah. Anybody else, anything great out there in Zoom land? Any good, Scott, you get any good birds on backyard bird count?
I've had a male Baltimore Oriole that's been coming to my feeder since the fall. I first saw it in November. And it's been coming, and I did feeder watch for Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, and it came every day. I managed to get some pictures of it and stuff, but I think it likes, I get that seed that has peanuts in it. in the blend. It's a blend I get, and they seem to, I think they're going for the peanuts. I'm not sure. But this time I mixed in some mealworms I got,
Ooh,
and
yum.
mealworms in with the seed blend that had peanuts and sunflower and safflower and that kind of thing. And he really seemed to like that. And so, yeah, so he's hanging around. He's been here all winter. So yeah,
That's
something different.
great. But you can only afford to feed him or your family going at that rate.
Yes, well, they were on sale, so I'll have to see what happens when the mealworms aren't on sale anymore.
Okay, that's great. Okay, that's wonderful. I'm envious. That's a great backyard bird. Yes.
We've had flocks of cedar waxwings.
Oh,
at our
don't you
bird
love
bath
it? Flocks of cedar waxwings.
The past week.
Oh, that's a treat.
Yeah, they're
That's
wonderful.
really a treat. That's a gorgeous bird. Lots of them.
Flock of 16 juncos. They
Juncos.
come in and go onto the deck. and really fun to watch.
Very nice. Juncos. All right. Well, if nobody has anything more to add, we will be adjourned. Those of you here, I hope you will go and eat. We have a lot of good sweet treats there. So please come and help yourselves. Thanks to everybody out there in Zoom land. We appreciate you tuning in. And hope to see you out and about. Bird Walk Saturday, so maybe we'll see you then. And great field trip coming up in March. So we'll be out there, out and about. Thanks, everybody. See you all soon.